Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Rachel and Dana. This is a podcast where two book coaches, editors, and besties discuss books not as readers but as writers to draw inspiration from great books and have lots of laughs along the way. We are off to a strong start. We've had bloopers already. First recording of the day, and I messed up the intro, guys. I'm just gonna come clean. I totally bungled the intro. I thought that I would remember it by heart, and I was like, yeah, I got this. And then I did not got it. Anyway, so today we are going to be talking about the plot of Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. But of course, before we do that, we always have to have a little bestie time, a little bestie check-in. So Dana, first things first, we are in the second week of February. What you got going on over there at Danja Tales? Or now, I don't, you just tell me. I just thought I'd low-key remind you of like when this episode comes out. I thought I was doing you a solid. It's just turning into a mess. So what you got going on over there, Dana? Oh, Lord help us.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay. Honestly, at the time, no, I'm not gonna lie. Wait. At the time of this recording, I just feel like I'm really trying to get into the swing of things. You know, January for us is like, we just trying to get through it. We just trying to get, because it's a very, very, very busy month for us, but we had a great time. So that was great. So when it comes to Danja Tales, I've been having a lot of fun just getting back into the flow of things, getting the community up and going after the holiday break, and honestly, preparing myself for more writing. I have not started this trilogy. I think I'm like, this is why it has not happened. So I'm low-key nervous, but I really need to get to it if I want it to make any traction this quarter. So that's what I'm preparing myself for. But right now, it's just been a lot of writing of like on the business side, social media, and getting our newsletter up and going, which I've been getting so many responses. People are loving it, which I'm glad about because I'm working so daggone hard on it. And I'm like, this is why I didn't do it before.
Yeah.
And I was so bad. Like I was doing stuff like helping clients with writing newsletters. And I'm like, I'm not even writing my own because I'm tired. I would just put something in there. And I'm like, okay, dang, we're going to do better. So yeah, enjoying writing the newsletter and finding topics. This is a squirrel moment. Realizing that to do this, I really had to find stuff that I enjoy writing about. And this has been very interesting sort of turn of events for me because I love writing, but I realize I'm not a nonfiction writer. That's nonfiction, like that's craft stuff. Like, do I know craft stuff? Absolutely. Could we talk about it until I am blue in the face, which is really hard to do when you are Black, right? So, it's like with now sitting down and having to write about it, and it's like, oh, what do I want to write about? And then you write about the stuff you feel like you should write about, and I realize this is boring.
That's okay. Listen, because if you're listening and you're a writer, you should be writing a newsletter. Okay, so this is not just like, oh, Rachel and Dana doing editor and business stuff. No ma'ams and no sirs. Okay, you have to write a newsletter. And you should, and that's like one of the best ways to connect with your audience. So I'm just saying this is only semi-tangential, but the moment you get stuck writing the stuff that you quote unquote should be writing, oh my God, that is the day the newsletter never happens. You get maybe a couple of newsletters out of that, and then you're like, oh God, and you will never write another newsletter again.
Listen, okay, so, and this is coming from someone, we got the little recap, from, first of all, every platform did recaps this year, which,
oh my gosh,
at first I was like, why is everybody recapping everything? But then I really liked them. When we looked at the recap for our newsletter platform, we sent over 2 million emails last year.
Holy mackerel. Good for, I don't think I've not sent 2 million emails in the course of my entire career. That is a lot of emails.
And that's not even including like, because we send our big romance newsletter through a different platform, so
Mm-hmm.
we send a lot of emails. So to sit down and do
One
this, it was
more
like,
email.
it's like, oh my gosh. So really, like, I'm laughing about it, but it really was something I had to go through, because it was like, okay, what do I enjoy? Like, because there's so much that you can talk about when it comes to romance. And it was just about allowing myself, or giving myself permission to pick what I wanted to pick. And that just sort of evolved into something even better. So it evolved into me picking my themes and picking my topics and starting to record the YouTube videos. And so it's just, so now I feel like I'm hitting a good little rhythm. But honestly, it's been the past 2.5 months of like beatboxing, like trying to figure out what was
Yeah.
doing. So it's been good, but and I think it's getting better. I feel like I'm hitting my stride. I'm starting to get a lot of replies, because we have really great, I feel like, opens and clicks, but now it's like we're getting replies too. And
Nice.
then to take that and put it like on LinkedIn, and starting to get a lot of traction with that, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
DMs. So it's going really well. But it, for a second there, I was like, okay, Dana, just, there are many days, like you said, one a week. Listen, I be at 11:59,
Mm-hmm.
59 on the last day,
Mm-hmm.
tinkering, and I'm almost at the point of being ahead, like, having them scheduled. Not
Mm-hmm.
quite there yet, but I'm getting close. And I just had to give myself permission. Like, and I find that even doing my newsletters as an author are much easier, because it just feels fun. So I just had to kind of like figure out how to lean into that. And I think for a while it's going to be like, y'all gonna get it however it is that I got it.
Yeah.
It's kind of low key selfish, but if I don't do it that way, I
You
won't
get nothing at
probably
all.
do
So
it. Listen. So, and now I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying seeing the same content, like how people respond on different platforms, because I do make different versions of it. And I'm looking forward to what is coming up. I haven't really fully gone into themes. I've sort of been hanging close to what I'm teaching, because it
Mhm.
just made it easier to not have to think about another thing.
Yeah,
But
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, this is low key a little bit boring. I apologize, but it just is what it is. So that's what it is. And I'll say this: I think it's also been interesting to write about the things that I feel like are the non-sexy things that you just gotta know,
Mm-hmm.
right? You
I feel like
gotta
that's
know
all
some
I
of these
write
things.
about.
Listen, you
I
listen, Rachel,
exclusively write about
you
non-sexy things.
listen, you do it well. But
Thank you.
girl, I be like, listen.
My only comfort is that, like, oh, thank God some people are into that, because I am like, oh yeah, technical stuff and like, and so I think maybe I need to like adapt some of your like writing about sexier stuff. Maybe I need to like bring some, like, I need to incorporate some of that into my what counts as the
Listen,
sexy stuff. I don't know. I
girl,
wrote a motivational email. Can I tell you something really quick?
yes.
I wrote this really heartfelt motivational email. That was like, a lot of times I was very like content, it's craft specific, and it's, I'm always trying to find like what are my clients, what are my students finding helpful right now? And like, let me just share that with you on my newsletter. And I wrote this more like, about kind of starting again when you fall off the wagon and all this kind of thing. And I had so many, four. Okay, this is what I say. So many. I had like several people unsubscribe, and I was like, ouch! I wrote nice things, and the people hated it.
Oh no.
I feel bad. I do always look at the unsubscribe number. I shouldn't.
Don't. You
But I
shouldn't.
do, and it's and I if I keep doing that, I'm never gonna write another email. It's literally good. But this
Don't
is
do it.
like the heartfelt one. Like, it wasn't all technical, and people were like, "Get out of here with your feelings." Blah. People did not like it. Again, I say, like, 4 people is not. It's not like I had a mass exodus off my email list, but it was like one of those moments where you're like, "Oh, okay."
I never look at unsubscribes, and the reality is I probably should pay more attention if I'm like actively doing stuff, but I find that when I'm aiming to really lock in a habit, I can't look at that.
Yeah.
It will just I don't think I care enough to like stop doing it because of that, but it would get distracting. And I think
Yes.
I would try to write stuff that I think you want me to write
Hmm.
versus it being, no, I'm a coach. Like I
Yeah.
understand. And here's the thing that I want to talk about today, or allowing myself the liberty to play with tone and to play with style and
Yeah.
to play with longer or shorter and giving
Hmm.
people options so that I can have the freedom to be able to just give it to you. God always said, like, I'm gonna give it to you the way I got it,
Yeah.
and then I'm gonna let you leave. And it just is what it is. So yeah,
Yeah.
girl, keep being in your feelings. Listen, they gonna tell you stop telling her that. Be in your feelings, Rachel.
Thank you, Dana. I will say, like, this actually, again, like we were sort of like we're joking about like, this is like boring stuff, but like this is also, again, we do this, for editing businesses. You do this as an author, and this is something that authors are doing, and that author like that again. I always talk with my clients about, okay, what are we doing for the email newsletter? Like what kind of content, and like the goal is to help them find something that they can enjoy writing about. Like that's so, because you're going to write newsletters until email stops being a thing, which is not happening in the
Mhm.
foreseeable future. Like right now, like email newsletters are still one of the best things that you can do to, again, connect with your readers and to remind them that you exist, and to like, let them know that your books exist, and let them see, what's coming up, and connect with them. Um, and one of the things that requires, because it requires consistency, is finding something that you can enjoy writing about, and something that you can, like, you're kind of looking for like the overlap between like, because of the kind of books that I write, what are my readers going to enjoy hearing about, and what do I enjoy writing about, and finding that overlap. I have one of my clients just crack this for like his email newsletter, and he's having so much fun. Like, he's sharing like historical facts and all, like, of sharing these stories and all, because he's writing historical fiction, and he's having a blast doing it. And when you find that place of like having fun with your newsletter, like that, not only does it translate in the newsletter, but then you can do it consistently. And so this is some of those like author realities of like, this is also part of the life. We love going into our writing caves and writing, and also there's this other thing called newsletters that we also have to do, and you got to find a way to do it.
You have to, and I think, well, yeah, and I think, just like I'm saying, like, you giving yourself permission to try stuff,
Yeah.
to try different formats, whether he's in that example giving facts or telling little stories or doing excerpts. Like, you want to do different things and doing different things that allow you to stay consistent
Mm-hmm.
and repeatable. Because
Yep.
if you have to think about that every time you sit down, it's like, oh, this is not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely. Because I mean, like, I would send stuff, and I'm just like, okay, it's not the same if you're like, okay, I'm speaking here, and here's the thing. I would do little short things, but I found that like I really wanted to do a little bit more. So almost like everything. If you're on all different platforms, you're sort of engaging with the content from different perspectives.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so that's what I've been doing out here in these streets, writing newsletters.
Oh man, in the grind, girl. that is that's part of the life. It's part of the life.
So, what about you? What do you have going on over there at StoryCypher?
Yes, well, besides losing email subscribers who hate my feelings, I'm just kidding, everyone. Also, I will say, like, again, pro tip, authors, you're writing a newsletter. If you are going to look at unsubscribes, I would only check periodically, in terms of like, if you had an email where like you had like, a mass exodus off of your, something that was like, oh, something did not go well, that kind of thing. But really, the like, especially just like Dana said, when you're building the habit, like those numbers, like pretty much every time you send an email, you're going to get a few unsubscribes. Like, this is just, people are clearing out their inbox. Like, this is just, it's by and large not personal. So just to kind of like, for anybody who is either starting an email newsletter or is like sort of newly getting into it, to not get to like, don't let it hurt your feelings when people unsubscribe.
And I will say this, I always tell my clients, you want them to go. You're paying for them to be there.
Yeah, that's true. If they don't want your stuff, you don't need to pay for them to be there.
Deuces, like
see, that's the real spirit right there. Okay, I'm like, don't get your feelings hurt, Dan. It's like, bye. Okay. No, see ya.
Listen,
and I think that's the right way.
Because in my mind, I'm like, you can't get tired of it. Like, listen, we are all grown. We know what email newsletters are about. You should not be surprised that somebody is going to try to sell you something or pitch you something. If you are surprised, what rock have you been up under? Get off and under it, and this may not be the spot for you, right? So yeah, so I would say, listen, as somebody who spends a lot on email platforms, if you don't want to be here, you're gonna get this email. Because I got to pay for it.
That's again more of that like author life reality is like, if you're not familiar with like newsletter creation, like email platforms, they charge you based on the number of subscribers you have. Yes. So yeah, so if you have people who are like, oh, this isn't for me, you're like, okay, good. It's good that you know that, and it helps me that you like, because if you have a bunch of people who don't like your newsletter, but you're paying for them to be there, ooh.
And that's what I tell my client, like, listen, you're paying for them to be there. So if they don't want to, listen, don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you. Listen. And it's okay. It just may not be their bag, but you want them to, right? And you want people to be there that want to be there, because when it's time for you to release another book, you want them to open. You want them to click. Yeah. And so this is, it's a reciprocal relationship.
Yeah. Absolutely. Look, see, that was secretly the pep talk I needed. I'm like,
and listen, don't let the door hit you. And you talk about your feelings. Listen, girl, bye. Let's do this.
This is, again, we had this conversation offline where I was like, my reaction to everything on the face, I'm like, this is fine. And then I go find a quiet corner and have a cry. Like I cry about everything. This is how mad, cry, angry, those are the same word, cry, sad, cry, happy, cry. It's all cry all the time.
You're in touch with your emotions. That's all.
Trevor would beg to differ. He's like, I feel like Josiah in Before I Let Go, when his therapist is like, do I need to pull out the emotions wheel? And he's like, I don't need the dang emotions wheel. And then he's like, shoot, give me the emotions wheel. Like that's somehow also me. I am both like in touch and completely just, it's a situation. So before we get derailed, you should laugh. I am 30 years old, okay?
There's nothing wrong with, girl, listen, if that's who you are, if that's the way God made you, baby, show up.
Thank you. You're the sweetest.
I was like, that you can cry for me too.
Listen, I promise you, I have enough eyebrows for the both of us, as you have told me, and I can cry enough for the both of us. Tears. So okay. I'm just gonna I'm holding up my end of the bargain over here.
Oh gosh, I love you so much. You're so great.
This is absolutely true. Okay, so I'll be super quick, so that way we can get to the goodness of the plot, because we spent 20 minutes talking about email lists and feelings. So this week, this month at StoryCypher, so in the Academy, we're having our first book club, which I'm super, super excited about, because, so this is specifically for our fellows. It's open to the whole cohort, but I really designed it for the fellows, because the way that it works is, so this is our first year of the fellows program of people who completed the initial run of the cohort. And the goal there, right, is again to have those baseline skills, to understand how to draft iteratively, so that as we talk about developing further skills, that doesn't get you stuck. You don't then start spinning on skills and then you never write, because you're trying to amass more skills. So it's sort of like, okay, we go through the process, we're going to go through all of the steps, and then we can talk about skills when you know where they fit and when you're supposed to be kind of trying to implement those in the process. And so this is So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a book club, and it's going to be on Ninth House, which of course it is.
Of course.
And I'd asked everyone, because I was like, you guys know I talk about Ninth House a lot. I've done a lot of video demos. I've talked a lot about it. We did it on the podcast. And there were several of them that were like, oh yeah, but I still haven't read it. And I'm like, oh, we are doing book club on, like, this is officially fair game because they haven't read it yet. And so what we're looking at specifically is how you build progressive complications in a story. How you actually, like, because this goes at this, and this is based on the questions that the students were having. Like, they were sort of like, okay, how do I do progressive complications in a scene and, like, not have just like a bunch of stuff happening where the scene kind of goes on forever because I'm trying to complicate, but then it just sort of like, it like just keeps going and going and going. Mm-hmm. Because that ties into the global arc of the story and those global complications, right? Because those happen in instances, in scenes. And so you're sort of looking at the macro and the micro. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on at the end of this month, is having a book club looking at how Leigh Bardugo sort of created the progressive complications and then how that works at the scene level to help them with their own development as they're sort of revising stories and trying to have a lot of students who are like, okay, my scenes are clocking in at like 5,000 words. They might be too long. And so how to sort of like trim that down and how to make sure that the story's focused and all that good stuff. So that's what we're going to be doing. I'm really excited because, you know, I love this book, and it's really exciting, I think, to get to see what questions students have and being able to tailor make something to those questions, to actually answer and resolve those for them in very concrete ways. So I'm really looking forward to having our first book club of the Academy and of the Fellows program. So that'll be at the end of the month. So I'm prepping for that.
I think it's really, I look forward to hearing how it goes. I think it's really interesting to do it and have a specific focus for the actual read, right? Because I know when we do ours, we don't have a specific focus, but we have had a season of that when we were looking at the 4-act structure. Yeah. So I think that's really interesting to think about the progression. And I think it would be also interesting to see what other tidbits that they pull from that particular book, just because it is so rich with, you know, examples and characters and world building. Like, that's going to be interesting. Yeah. And I wonder if it slows down reading. Do you think it slows down the reading?
I mean, it definitely, I think so. For my students, I'm really just encouraging them to read it, knowing that we're going to go into this discussion. And so I think for them, they may be looking for it, but I really just want them to have the context so that when I start pulling out examples and talking about it, they're not completely disconnected from the story. So I think for the most part, they really will get to just read as readers and then have that context, but it will slow down the reading for me. It will slow down the reading for me big time.
It will. So are you just committing to this one, or this is something you want to do more of?
We definitely will be doing more of them, but I'm sort of tailoring these sessions based on where the students are at and what they need. So we may not do, you know, book club every single month, especially because right now, most of my students, and after this book club, most of my students will be in writing mode. And so, and because we had this discussion during the cohort of like, hey, do you guys want to do a book club? And they're like, I am in the trenches of my draft. Like, I kind of just need to, I would rather just focus on this. Like, I don't feel like I'll have the time to like just read a book and like kind of focus on that. And so we sort of like, you know, take a step back during those intensive writing periods, because, you know, we write first draft in a month, second draft in a month. And so we'll continue to do those, but I'm going to space them out based on the needs of the community. So we're very, very flexible with the types of sessions we do. And I really tailor them to where the students are and what they need in the moment, which just makes it super fun. Cause then you're just, you know, you're answering questions, but also like developing material on specific topics. And so we will do more of them, but not necessarily at a specific cadence at the moment.
Yeah, keep me posted. I mean, I know we will know, but I think that's interesting. I think that's really interesting. It makes me think, especially now that we're going into like our 3rd year book club, but we still get so much from it. So it's like, and I've never done it at as far as a specific focus,
Mm-hmm.
other than when we did the 4-act structure, and also when we did reading a series.
Yeah.
And I actually think we may end up doing it again with reading a trilogy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so really curious. Yeah, keep me posted.
Yes, ma'am. All right. Thank you for Dana. Thank you for sharing what's going on over there, and thank you for humoring me as I talk about what we got going on over at StoryCypher. Without further ado, let's go ahead and start talking about "Before I Let Go" by Kennedy Ryan. We're going to dive deep into the plot, but before we go any further, Dana, would you hit us with that summary?
I sure will. Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan is a second chance romance that begins after the marriage has already ended. Yasmin and Josiah are divorced, but their lives remain deeply intertwined through co parenting their children and running the restaurant they've built together. Both are trying to move forward, yet unresolved grief, emotional avoidance, and years of shared history keep pulling them back into each other's orbit. As therapy, parenting challenges, and long buried feelings surface, the story becomes less about whether they still love each other and more about whether they are capable of choosing each other again.
Ooh, that's a good. What I love about this summary is it's already kind of touching on things that we're going to talk about. Like it's
Yes.
we had so much conversation before we started recording, and so I'm like, oh, there's look, I see all of the like, oh, I can pick them all out. So with that in mind, what are some of the sort of like overarching topics that you want to cover with regard to the plot today?
I feel like I should issue like a general caveat at the beginning of every episode is a reminder that we cannot cover everything.
Yeah.
And also a general caveat of that this is by no means like judging or bashing or whatever, but it is a like an intellectual conversation, and also us taking into consideration that people who listen can be a seasoned writer, they can be a new writer, they can be a writer with an audience, they can be a writer without an audience, and all of those differences make a difference to this, this kind of a discussion. So I'll say that at first. So the first thing that, well, this is in no particular order, so I'm just going to give it to you what I got on my paper. Okay. One of the things that I want us to talk about is the fact that in this story, just like in the summary, this isn't about falling in love. And that's really unique for a romance. Even when you talk about a second chance romance, a lot of times, well, we'll talk about it, but the point is, it's not about falling in love. And that's different. And it really does affect the story. And you'll find that some of the things that we'll discuss affect the other areas that we talk about, like the plot and the characters, because of this one thing that once you realize, it's like, oh, yeah, that makes a huge difference. Another thing that I want us to talk about is the fact that there is no villain in this story. I kind of put that the true antagonist in this story is fear. And so this is also, again, one of those rare stories where the protagonists are each other's antagonists. And that's common, that's normal in romance. But it's not normal to be one of the biggest antagonistic energies in a story. You usually have more going on, like an external, a bigger external plot. And so for it to be each other, a lot of it turns into internal antagonism. And so, again, that is not common. And so we definitely want to talk about that. Another thing is that I would put in the sort of plot category is the fact that this story does an amazing job of showing healing on the page. And I feel a little bit weird saying healing when we're talking about plot, because you really want to feel like healing is more of like an internal, like the character story arc for themselves of like their journey to healing, but that it plays a huge part in this story. And I think she does a really great job at it. And so I have healing on the page. And then the final thing This is one of my things that is usually like the heel that I would be on, like with a megaphone. Like, I believe that every romance should have a breakup scene. Sometimes readers don't like it, but I think it does a very crucial thing in a plot for the breakup scene to happen. And here, I think it was really interesting that the reconciliation wasn't a big breakup. There was even the all is lost moment wasn't a huge deal. It sort of was like quiet. And I think there's pros and cons to that, but I think that's a really interesting thing to point out, especially if you're somebody that's writing a story where you don't have a high stakes story, you have a low stakes story, or you have a story like this where a big part of the energy comes from the internal changes and transformation that's happening. So the fact that the you know, it's totally in alignment with what's going on in the story, but it is sort of like if you're in a fight and you try to slam the cabinets and you have soft closed cabinets. It kind of felt like that.
Or hanging up dramatically on your cell phone, which has no drama to that. We're not slamming phones down anymore. We're like, boop, and then sometimes you can't even hit the button, and it's yes.
Right. So I think it's important. I think this story really does a great job at some areas that are like, you don't see this often, and it's done well. And I think, but I will say, just as I feel like I'm issuing a lot of caveats. I think a lot of these things come with pros and a lot of cons. Yeah. So you really have to do them well.
Yeah, yeah. And it's that conversation of like, because we're speaking to a whole gamut of writers, to just kind of to know, like, to go in with both eyes like wide open, right? And to kind of know what you're doing, to do things with intention. And so to understand, an individual author's sort of particular genius, as well as like where it could work for you or it could not work for you. And so again, being aware of those pros and cons in particular for a given approach.
Wait, and before you go on, I would say too, and I'm sure we'll say this probably a few times, I think this book, these episodes for this particular book are really going to be a lot of sort of weaving in between our normal topic areas. It kind of reminds me of like when we were talking about Mistborn. It was really, really hard to just talk about each of the individual areas. And I think that's going to be really, really true of this, because a lot of the editor's takes are going to help with how to maneuver if this is something you'd like to do, or to keep you from sliding into the con side of some of these things, because there's a lot of things that we could talk about, but those are some of the big ones. And I'm sure I'm going to do more as, offshoots of your questions and of what your topics are, but I want to make sure we hit these.
Yeah, absolutely. And mine should pretty much kind of like nest right into yours, because we had a lot of sort of like similar overlapping things. So one of the things that I kind of want to talk about, especially because we're in, the episode dedicated to plot, is the fact that this story is a bit more almost like slice of life feeling, right? So we don't have like a heavy external antagonism. The conflicts are sort of it's largely like the challenges are largely interpersonal, and what that does in the story and how that sort of affects the way that the story unfolds. And I think it's important as like sort of like just a side point about that, is that there is still antagonism at work in the story. And so we're not like, it's not like there's no conflict. It's not like it's antagonism free, but we're looking at pure, almost largely interpersonal conflict, and then internal self conflict, and how that affects the story when that's sort of the primary point of conflict. So I want to talk about that. And then I also want to kind of ask a little bit about some of the choices that she made and how quote unquote allowed those are in romance, because these are specifically plot choices. But there are some rules that I don't want to say they're like almost hard and fast, but again, there's just like certain lines that you don't cross in romance. And I want to know how close she got to some of those lines. for certain aspects of the story. And so this will be largely spoiler free. What the questions I'm going to ask about are from early, they're pretty early in the story. So those are like the two. I just kind of want to like give those big categories because it's going to fit right in with what you sort of are already talking about. So why don't we just kind of start at the top about how this story is is unique as a romance, because it's not about falling in love, because they never fell out of love. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, and one thing before I talk about that, I will say that I'm not doing it as a specific topic, but this story does really well as far as being an African American romance or a Black romance. And so I'm not putting it as plot, and I wouldn't do it as characters, but I don't want to miss the fact that it is very culturally aligned and very much in the sort of feel and vibe of a Black romance. And so, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I can always come back around to it if we have a little extra time. So when I talk about the fact that this is a romance and it's not about falling in love, that is very rare, primarily because that is why we are here, right? Like
Yeah.
it's all about them, meeting, starting to like vibe with each other, going through the process of getting to know each other and falling in love, and then that love being tested and them deciding whether this is the relationship that they're willing to change for, fight for, be in, etc. And in this story, they've been married and they are coexisting, just like the summary said. They're running a business, they are taking care of their kids, they're going to parent meetings together, and that is really different, being that the backbone and the sort of spine of a romance is this.
Yeah.
So now you could say, well, I mean, there's a lot of second chance romances, and they are, but a lot of times the second chance romances are around them coming back together, and then maybe over the course of that relationship sort of rekindling, realizing they never lost feelings, and one person may have, but it doesn't feel here. It feels like, honestly, it feels like in a lot of ways they didn't miss a beat. And it's almost as if we don't have the full external representation of the falling apart of the marriage. And it echoes the internal things that we sort of get from the story. But here, it can kind of be a pro and a con, because then we don't get the getting to know you scenes. They already know each other, right? We don't get them starting to like realize that they have attraction, because they both still kind of do. Now it kind of becomes a surprise that they're allowing themselves to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
But it's and essentially, like, this is the bulk of a romance, and it's
Yeah.
not here. So I think one of the things that makes it interesting is that she carries it off well, and we start seeing whether it's repressed feelings, um things and feelings that they've swept under the rug and sort of um intentionally bypass
Hmm.
so that they can continue to parent their kids. But it is a strong part of this. And I think in the end, um, it works, but it does also make it that, how would I say it? It makes it that you have to find other ways to explore that relationship if
Hmm.
that's why we are here.
Yeah.
That's what a romance is. And I think sometimes it did a great job, and there was aspects where you pulling in the environment, pulling in the kids, pulling in friends, pulling in the holidays.
Hmm.
But I do feel like in some aspects, like, we kind of miss it, and by the time they're really into it, it's like towards the end. But I think it does the story justice overall
Yeah.
because of the reason why their marriage fell apart. Like,
Yeah.
because if they would have rushed back in, you would have felt like it's not realistic, right?
Yeah.
It kind of goes to your slice of life, and I kept feeling like this is like very much a realistic romance. It's not a fantasy style of romance. This is real
Mhm.
life depicted on page, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think overall it works, but it is something that we could always kind of circle back around and look at it as it could be a potential con. Like you have to be a really great writer and you have to pick moments that really give us insight into where they are in that spectrum of being back. They have love for each other, but being back in love. And I still think they were in love, but whatever.
Yeah.
But like how you're doing it and being aware of it and tracking it as a writer. Because I think it would have been so easy to lose that thread, which would have seemed odd, right? For them to be here and to lose that thread. But I think it would have been easy to lose it.
Yeah, and it's sort of like one of those things where like if you're not being really intentional about the choices you're making, you could slide into one of these cons simply because you didn't, you sort of like
Nothing.
didn't realize you
Yeah.
do it by accident.
Yeah.
And that you definitely don't want that where you slide over into some of the cons that we're going to talk about or the potential pitfalls again just by mistake by overlooking something or not making your choices with intention. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
um a lot of what makes this story so interesting is that we are looking at two very emotionally mature adults. Like they did, yes, they had a divorce, but like they, before we ever show up to the story, made choices about how they were going to handle it, right? Where it's like, we are going to protect our kids. We're going to do what's best for them. And we're going to work out this co-parenting thing. And there's even moments in the narration where it's like, where they're like, obviously we're gonna like I don't understand people who don't do this, right, who sort of don't make these sort of hard choices in order to take care of their kids, and they co-run the restaurant. And so the story kind of starts on, actually, even though they did get divorced, they have a really strong foundation just generally, right? And I think that kind of leads into as well a little bit of the like where the conflict does and doesn't come from,
Mm-hmm.
and how the conflict sort of like ties much more into the like interpersonal aspects of the relationship and internal healing. So kind of just sort of like segue, one of the questions I want to ask you, so I said that this is sort of more slice of life, almost kind of like more like domestic drama. It's not, we don't have a heavy like external drive, right? The restaurant is failing, there's an expand we're in the middle of an expansion and it's creating chaos. We don't have really anything like that. We just sort of have ordinary life stuff that happens that kind of crops up along the way. And I want to know, is this common to like for contemporary romance? Do you normally see this more slice of life feel where you don't have that same level of external antagonism? Um, or is this sort of more unique to this particular story?
You have it, but I will say a lot of times you may find that they'll add a little bit of drama or a little bit of suspense so that it won't feel so one dimensional, or so that you have more highs and lows in the story.
Mhm.
But yeah, I would say in contemporary, you'll have it more often. I do think in this case, like you could have had a little bit more external,
Yeah.
like meaning even if it was particular, we kind of got it towards the end where during the transitions in the business, but
Hmm.
there wasn't one that felt like it was a consistent through line, and usually that's there. So it could have been, you know um somebody trying to buy their business, or they're having competitors and buying the like
Hmm.
that still would have been a slice of life, right? That still would have
Yeah.
been your sort of regular regular life, if you will. But would have still given the opportunity to have more peaks
Yeah.
to be able to offset the valleys of this story. So
Yeah.
yes, you do. But I would find that of the stories that we've talked about, and we talked about this a little bit in the like when we did our pre-talk of like stories like Things We Never Got Over. If
Hmm.
you remember, towards the end, there was an introduction of a little bit of suspense, right?
Hmm.
Like just to give it a little bit of action and kind of change up the pace a little bit.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit of a shift that was still attached to the same storyline. Like it wasn't out of nowhere, but it was a part of it. What's another? Um, I don't think we've done any others. all of them almost had a little bit of suspense. I can't think of any others that would be an example that we can do here, but I will say, and even other stories that you and I have done, and you miss that. Here you
Yeah.
miss it because there are elements here, so it holds the story together. But I think one of the things that we've discussed, and we may talk about again in a future episode, is that another writer probably wouldn't have been able to do it the way that she did this.
Yeah.
I think her being Kennedy Ryan,
Yeah.
you get probably a lot of leeway. But I also think that there are other things that were sprinkled in that helped, like the
Yes.
cultural aspects, the gatherings, the other things that helped to balance it out, so that that it wasn't just a lot of sort of sameness as they worked through those internal journeys, was helpful. But I would say in general, you will see this a lot more, and the romance becomes really a huge, if not the driving force. But a lot of times there is some stuff there that's sprinkled in just for that. That helps with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. Is like that's what I'm accustomed to seeing in romance, is that there's usually some just other, like, for lack of a better way, like a more maybe tactful way to put it, there's some external plot line, so that we have something to do on the during the other scenes. So that we have something to focus on, we have something to keep moving the story forward, when our lovers aren't on the page together. And that part of the story, because like that the romance, it takes time to develop. It takes, you have to give some of that space, because like they're falling in love, they're coming into a relationship, and so we need kind of stuff to like sort of almost like fill in the gaps. And you'll usually have more of it, some kind of external plot to kind of help do that, but we don't really have that here. We have pieces of external plots, and again, this also ties into your statement that we don't really have a villain, right? So to your point, there's not like, a competitor trying to buy out the restaurant, and that throws them together, and they're sort of forced to work together in a new way or in a unique way that sort of brings them together. It's a lot of little things, of like, again, raising their children, Kasim's potential, Deja's struggles in school, and then interpersonal struggles with her mom. Like it's little things, but not one thing that kind of like just sort of ties the rest of it together. Now, but the way that she counterbalances that, like, one of the reasons I think the story still works on the whole is because because she's so intentional about the emotional notes that she hits in terms of like very heartfelt, making us care deeply about the characters. So you sort of like, that helps kind of counterbalance that. But if I were talking to a writer who wants to write a story like this, I would encourage them to kind of bring out a little bit more, bring in some kind of external antagonism to challenge the characters. And you want to, and this is something we talked about in the pre-show of like, when you have very integrated characters, like very integrated protagonists, which Yasmin and Josiah are, right? Like, yes, they have their stuff, but they are going to therapy. They are working on themselves. Like, we are not dealing with like a couple of like 19-year-olds who are like dumb and just young, right? They're behaving like grown adults, which I find so refreshing in a story, right? That people aren't being crazy, and they're not like, you're not feeling like, okay, you are in your late 30s, and I think that you should. This is what is going on here. That for me will be quickly a pet peeve in a story when it's, people are being silly and they seem too old to be being that silly, even though it happens, and right, it happens all the time in life, in real life. But what that means when you have, and we talk about this in fantasy a lot, when you have a very like well integrated or a highly competent protagonist, one of the things that becomes the challenge is bringing an external conflict to meet them, right? Like, that is sort of like, that is worthy of the challenge. Now, Yasmin they are confronted by deep internal challenges, but those can be hard for those to solely sustain the story, which is why I think that added external sort of element can help challenge them in those places so they can still grow the way you want them to, but also so that it's not solely relying on just the internal that internal wrestle, if that makes sense.
It does. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's some of it could be style. I haven't read enough of her books to be able to say that. It could be a lot of times it can happen where a person just tells the story the way that the story came to them.
Mhm.
But I do feel like if we would have had that here, it would have helped. Now she did a great job of pacing, which I had down like pacing in us seeing this the transformation that they're going through even without it. But that would have helped a lot, right? It would
Mhm.
have helped. We see them, go through the process of um, um, working through the issues with their son, and both of them, as far as their experiences and issues with therapy and addressing what the one of the sort of the essentially it was almost like a pile up of grief that
Mhm.
just sort of dismantled their marriage because they just couldn't the way that the both of them coped
Mhm.
wasn't compatible.
Mhm.
And because it happened in such a sort of confined space and time, it just undid them. And the story was about like, can they get back there in a healed way? And so yeah, so we see it, and I think we see pockets of it too, but I think the fact that it wasn't one thing other than the grief
Mhm.
transformation, it did make it feel like almost everything was an internal thing. And so, I think it's a personal choice. I think it's a personal choice about the type of sub niche that you want. But I also think it makes for a really great reading and understanding if you're someone that you want to write something that is a
Yeah.
little bit heavier on the emotional side. And
Mhm.
also, this really does help people if you are waffling when it comes to counseling and therapy
Mhm.
and how that can help you get through and over and handle life on the other side of grief. But it
Yeah.
also means that we are talking about counseling and therapy and grief
Yeah.
and death, and it's not even so far as to be, I feel like, in a trigger way, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes in some stories it goes all the way there where you kind of are warning. I don't think it goes there because we're on the other side of the actual event.
Yeah.
But because we didn't have an external thing that could kind of parallel the story,
Mhm.
it means that we kind of sitting in it
Yeah.
until we're not. And it's
Yeah.
at the very end when we're not.
Mhm.
So it sounds weird, but when you read the story, when you know, but I do get it. And so I feel like she did a great job as far as showing it on the page so that we knew at all times where they were in their journey
Yeah.
between them talking about it, them confronting it, them going to counseling sessions, them realizing. And so
Mhm.
I think that helped.
Yeah.
But I think it could also be a little bit of it can make you feel like you have an external when you don't.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I do something I want to point out, and this is like relevant for like all writers everywhere all the time. So we talked about, yeah, okay, would have liked to have seen a little more like something external that's like unified that kind of helps solidify all the pieces together. But I think something that she did really well, and that is important to know, especially if you are kind of looking to deal with more, maybe go more slice of life or deal with more topics around healing and grief, these like these very deeply internal topics, um, is that there is still antagonism at work in the story, right? And so I
Yes.
wouldn't want someone to read this and be like, oh, I can have a story that like doesn't that doesn't have a lot of antagonism, or that doesn't have that, as though that we're missing from the story, because that's not the case at all. Like there is still antagonism at work in this story, and it comes from all kinds of like sort of different places. So you said this already, but primarily like it's Yasmin and Sai and them, them and each other, and that's where a lot of the antagonism comes from. But then there's also, especially for Yasmin, like her daughter Deja, there is antagonism coming from Deja, and there is, for Yasmin also, from Vashti, and not because Vashti is doing anything wrong, but because she's hanging around her ex-husband, right? And that's like, and but then there's also, it sort of generates this tension between them of, she's like, oh, like, don't put your hands on him, but also he's not mine anymore, and so we still, and then for Josiah, one of my favorites is Dr. Musa, like, and the kind of antagonism where he very much provokes Josiah and challenges him, and sort of like, gives him the kind of rub that he needs to grow. And so there you still do have, and then again, largely so much of their conflict comes from their battle with themselves. And so you still have antagonism at work in the story. And I think that's part of what also helps to carry it, is that, we're always seeing antagonism from different sides. So it doesn't feel like they're just like floating through life altogether. And so just kind of contrasting that, like, we would have liked to have seen something maybe external, which would have been helpful, but also to not mistake that there's no antagonism, right?
Right. And this kind of, we're sort of transitioning through the topics fairly smoothly, because this was one of the points that I made, is like, I feel like the biggest antagonist here is fear, and it comes in different capacities for them. But I also feel like it can kind of it won't go unnoticed, but I think the gravity of it feels a little more squishy because it's not tangible. And that is depression, right? And grief. And so what happens is you have this thing that doesn't take form, and you are aiming to show it as like the culprit, or show it as the villain. And you want to be really intentional about how you do it, because you don't have a thing. You don't have, right? But listen, this thing was powerful enough to take them out and their marriage, So it's there. But I think, I think it's really, I, as a editor or a coach, I don't think I've ever had a client where it was like this, because I think I would have always asked for more of an external, so that it would have allowed us to anchor some things, so it wouldn't have been squishy. So I will say, I think it's done well. But well, and it really is no but. It's just but when you realize, like, oh, that's why, then it makes a lot more sense, and it makes everything flow a little bit better, because you get it, and it's like, oh. And I think I think it's done well. And I think, for me, the more I read the story, the more I get of the story. But when I read it the first time, I was like, wait, something feels, like, it was like, because I feel that. And it was like, okay. And being able to articulate, like, what's going on that I'm feeling and digesting. And because she does such a great job with the characters and the subplots, and like all of those aspects, it sort of merges it together, and it sort of goes together like a good gumbo. Like, it's like, all the flavors are there to where it's like all blended together. And but I will say, because of us talking about this as editors to writers, know that this is a very challenging thing that she makes look easy. And it's not easy. So, yeah.
And again, that's like, if you're wanting to tackle topics like that, and that's like a central, especially like as a central aspect of the plot or of the story, recognizing that this is an intangible thing that you are trying to tackle, and that external circumstances can help you to translate that to the reader, right? And so to know that, like, if this is, if you're wanting to do those heavy internal things, it's easy to go wrong and go amiss with it, because it is intangible, because it can be difficult outside of narrating the experience. It can be difficult to translate as, to really communicate the true depth and the true power of this as a force of antagonism. And so being aware of that.
But I will say that she did a great job, and I'm saying they because she's probably working with several editors, but she did a great job. I think what helped too is the fact that they gave some external things to sort of like allow us to kind of reconnect with the paint, the floor, right?
Yes.
The nursery, right?
Yep.
Things like that. So it was like, okay. So it kind of did ground it a little bit to give a sense of a tangible nature to something that doesn't take form, like a physical form. And so I think those are choices that you want to make if you decide that you want a story somewhat, like this. And then sort of just bleeds into the final note that I have here about, the reconciliation feeling a little bit more like a softer reconciliation. It was an overflow of what we've seen as far as transpiring in their relationship. And it made sense. It was emotionally honest. It was an alignment with what Josiah and Yasmin were going with, but it did feel on the softer side. And you don't want it to all be about like drama and fights and all that other stuff. Like you don't want it to always be about that. But I do feel like the con of it was that it made it feel back like that everything sort of stayed in the same register throughout the story. And I would have liked more peace to balance out the valleys, because for me personally, it was emotional. It is a great read, but it is an emotional read. And I personally don't do emotional reads, but this was a great pick because it is very much tackling a real life situation. I think this is a really great depiction of something, story. If you are someone that is doing to fictionalizing your personal story, like you could totally see this being a great example of that. Also, how characters show up and are utilized in this story is superb. Right, especially the kids, like what we'll talk about in next week's episode. So there are so many things that it just does amazingly well, but I think there are a lot of things that would have kind of probably fell off if you were a less skilled writer, or if you didn't have an existing audience that were very familiar with the fact that you tackle these kind of issues.
Yeah. And I think, I just want to make a quick note as well. If you're doing this type of story, or and this is going to be true, this is also true, like whether you're fictionalizing a personal experience or like memoir, I think something that she does really well and something you really want to pay attention to is being like really choosing the moments you're putting on the page, right? Like really saying, okay, like this moment in time, this is where, this is what's happening. This is where they're at in their internal transformation. And here is how this particular scene is participating in that, so that we don't wind up, because we don't have this in this story. So Kennedy Ryan doesn't do this, but it's easy to fall into, you just have scenes that are like, just a normal day, and just like, where we're not actually moving the story forward necessarily, or we're not highlighting moments and details that really matter to the overarching plot. And so something that she did really well, especially, it having more of a slice of life feel, if she's going to do that, choosing moments that have the most impact, choosing moments that mean the most to the story, to the development of the story, to the internal arc, to the internal wrestling, and not falling for just another day in the life where we get this. Because then that is something that even when you're tackling these really difficult topics, or you're tackling an antagonist like depression or fear, or right, these things that are intangible, that is a thing that will sink your story really, really quickly, and you won't get the opportunity to actually like tease that out if you're again, if you're not really intentional about the moments you choose to put on the page as the story moves forward, especially when you're in, again, if we're sort of like lower stakes, we're not, working with an action story where it's like, oh, clearly we're doing this thing. And then, I mean, it can happen in an action story as well, right? Where you just sort of like have these like bumping around scenes. But she was really intentional with the moments that she chose. I think that's a really important thing to be aware of for a story like this.
Yeah. And she, like, now that's out the park, because as you were saying that, I was thinking about the scene. We don't do spoilers, so I'm not going to do a spoiler, but just so that Rachel knows what I'm talking about. This scene when she had to go get the robot remote
Mm-hmm.
for her son,
Yep.
like that was perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like so I think what really at the end of all this, as we sort of like kind of bring this all together, because I know you wanted to ask a couple more questions about sort of the rules, or air quote rules of romance. I think that's what the balance is, right? A lot of times, like if you have the low stakes, or you have here where a lot of what is transpiring is the things that cannot be seen or touched or felt, that it is the emotional pull, the internal wrestling, that all of these other things are doing a lot of work and you don't realize it because it is done so well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things I think is you get pulled into the story. You care about them. You want them to win. You want to see where this is going to go. And a lot of that is being shaped and molded by the choices
Yeah.
that were made. The scenes that
Mm-hmm.
were picked, what was put on the page, how she, showing the tug of war that each character is having between their actions and their words and what they're feeling internally. Like all of those things are working together beautifully, so that when it's all said and done and the smoke clears, you have such a beautifully written story about this family's resilience and this couple's choice to choose love even when life was lifing, and it's done well.
Absolutely. So because this is sort of like, yeah, gonna tie back just a little bit. I have like one sort of last question, and then we'll make sure that we've sort of hit anything that you wanted to make sure you hit today. But so in the story, we have our love interest dating another woman. And obviously this isn't cheating, they're divorced. And cheating is usually one of those like major no-goes of in romance. Um, but I was just curious, Josiah dating Vashti, and again, it's not cheating, but it is, you do have your main male lead with another girl. And so like, because I think about like in the things we never got over, when like the breakup between Knox and Naomi, she thinks there's another, but there's not really another, right? And so like, is that allowed, quote unquote? Is that, did she do something that, because it felt to me in the context of a romance kind of daring. I was like, oh, well, like I just, it feels like that they're seeing other people. This feels like surprising to me. And so I'm just curious of like, is that common? How, again, quote unquote allowed, always in air quotes, is that, can you just like talk about that particular choice, and how often we see something like that in romance?
I don't think you see it often, mainly because it's such a fine line. Here, though, if you look at some of the other things like that come afterwards and how it's described and what he was aiming to do, it
Mhm.
kind of is painted in a way that is understandable, right? Of
Yeah.
what he's just trying to get over, right? And trying to show that
Mhm.
he's moved on, whether he
Yeah.
has fully or not. But and the fact that they were not in a relationship, and
Mhm.
both of them knew that they were not. So you just want to be really clear about that,
Yeah.
or else it can look like infidelity, and that can in the end affect how people feel about your character, and
Yeah.
whether they're relatable or whether they're likable, or whether
Yep.
you want to continue to see whether how things work out in the end. And here I feel like it was done well, even though sometimes like it sounds weird, but it almost was done too well. But yeah, it
Yeah.
works. But you don't want to do it if you don't want to do it if you can help it. And if you notice, a lot of times it was not done on the page. That helps
Yep.
as well. Right? You
Yeah.
see little things like PDA, but it
Mhm.
wasn't a lot, and you hear it mentioned and you understand, and that it
Yeah.
was not hidden and lied about. So all of
Mhm.
those things matter to make it so that it's at the end of the day understandable to the reader, so it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like a betrayal
Yeah.
or something that can be a knock against his character,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
in
which you
his
really, yeah,
moral.
don't want.
Exactly. And that's what cheating does, right?
Yeah.
About their integrity and their morals. Like you don't
Mm-hmm.
want to question that. Even when you have, morally gray guys, usually that
Mm-hmm.
never happens, right? It just
Yeah.
doesn't. And part of it is at the end of the day, like that's not the fantasy,
Yeah, that's
right? That
exactly
you
what I was thinking
don't nobody
about.
want to sign up, to be with a dude that's a cheating dude. But
Yeah.
here I think you can, and I think that's why you started having the repetition of like, but you asked for it, but you
Mm-hmm.
asked for it. I didn't want it, you asked for it. And I think
Yeah.
that was a little repetitive, but having that in there helped to offset some of the other things that were going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense. I thought that she was like that it's one of those things that could go wrong quickly. But she really was very intentional about the way that she handled it. And again, that was a part of the interpersonal antagonism at work in the story. So is there anything else you want to make sure to mention before we wrap up our discussion on the plot of Before I Let Go?
There is one small thing that we didn't talk about, and I think I mean, we may mention it in characters, but it's the fact that this book does a great job at being a book one.
Mm,
It does a great job of being book one in a series because we get introduced to the female protagonists that are in the rest of the series, and you automatically are curious about them. Hendrix and Soledad, like we are already like,
yeah.
oh, like Soledad's husband, baby, we was like Hendrix, like,
Hmm.
what is he doing? We was doing the side eye, and
Yep.
we could see, Hendrix as being this big, badass, black woman just doing that thing,
Yeah.
but also having a softer side and dealing with some things that are really challenging that people would understand when it comes to the life changes and caring for an
Mhm.
adult parent, an
Yeah.
aging parent. And so I love that. I love seeing that when we have an opportunity to see protagonists that you can start caring for, so that when the stories come up, you don't second guess whether you want to experience those books as well. And so I
Yeah.
think that was a great thing, and it folded into the existing plot, and it helped
Yeah.
with the story, and just the girlfriend code,
Yeah.
and them being like, get your stuff together. You don't want him to see,
Yeah.
like it was like, baby, fix your face.
Yeah.
And I loved that.
Yeah.
Um, and the final thing that I want to mention is that this story sort of, for me, like sits on this cusp between romance and women's fiction. And I
Mhm.
think some of the things that we've discussed when it comes to plot are because of that sort of rub.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like I've heard Kennedy Ryan like do interviews and talks a couple of
Mhm.
times, and I believe she's a romance reader. Um and I don't have anything else like in my notes, like when I went back and look at my notes that said different. But I do feel like sometimes when you have these stories that are really close, you may find that they read romance, but they're not an avid reader, and that can sometimes affect the way that the story comes across because of whether there's a lack of experience with some of the
Mm.
nuances that come from being a romance reader. But I do feel like it's sort of a cusp there. And you do find that sometimes with African American romance,
Mm.
that it is, unlike some of the others, very female driven.
Mhm.
And so we do sort of feel some of that rub with some of the things that we've talked about in this plot episode.
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. And I think too, again, just like always with books, being able to position them genre wise is always like that's always so important. And I think when you think about the book that you are writing, right? Thinking about and this is why we talked about comps way back in I don't know, November or
No,
something.
November,
Um,
December. Oh yeah, November.
yeah, yeah, it was right in between November and December.
Hmm.
And so you guys can find that on the like on YouTube. We've got like the bonus episodes. There's like a playlist of that where we talk about it's got all the bonus episodes, but specifically the one about comps. This is why it's important to think about where your book is positioned, right? So that like you can make those choices again, make them intentionally, and be cognizant of like what you're doing and how you're doing it so that you can so that your book gets in the hands of the right readers, the people who are like who want to read the story, who will like this kind of story. And so positioning books in their sort of like respective genres, and then thinking about how your book relates to those books and where, again, where it sits on a shelf and where it belongs is so, so helpful. So you can set the right expectations for your readers with things like covers and blurbs and like the way that you market the book, and also to, again, help it like help position, like help the readers with their expectations so that they can kind of go in and understand the kind of story, so that they don't expect one thing and then get something else. Because sometimes what can happen is if you have a book where a reader thinks they're going to get one thing and they get something else, if they had known what they were getting, they may have liked it. Like they might still have liked it, but if they feel like they were expecting one thing and then they got something completely different, purely on the basis of that jarring experience, it can sort of like alienate the reader because they're like, this is not the book that I was promised, right? So that's, I just think recognizing this is like, ooh, this is almost sort of like verging toward women's fiction, and recognizing the way that that impacts how the book plays out and how the book is written, is really, really helpful when you're reading the book and sort of positioning it in your mind to understand how it functions.
Yeah, I will say that in general, like for African American romance, it is in alignment with that. So I don't think that would be a surprise. I think the biggest surprise in that regard for me as a reader, not as an editor and all that, just like me as a reader, is like I just was not prepared for it to just be like the grief to be griefing.
Yeah.
And, you know, especially with such a vibrant cover and all that other stuff. And that's just not my normal picks as a romance reader. But overall, I think it was done well. And I'm glad that I read the book. So, yeah, but I think as someone, you know, going back to the top of this and the caveats of like where you are as a writer, whether you have an existing audience, whether your readers know that this is the type of stories that you like to tell, whether that is communicated effectively, are all going to play into what that experience is, because what we're doing in each one of those decisions are we're giving you permission, right? We're giving you permission to go there. And also we're sort of extending grace to let you take some time to get us there so that we understand. And I think she did do a great job of that, so that we were on board for the journey and through to the end, and really invested in this couple getting to their happily ever after.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Also, to bring it like full circle, your newsletter can also help with these things, authors.
Okay, come
right?
on.
To help like understand, like, okay, where are we positioned? What kind of stories do we tell? What is our vibe? All of that good stuff. Newsletters are great for that. So now we have completed the entire circuit of the whole episode. Oh, I love it when you just
come on,
bring it all the way around. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for a little jumbo extra episode with all of this juicy convo that we had over the plot of Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave us a review, leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought about the book, or questions that you have, things you want to hear more about. We would love to, field some Q&As and use those bonus episodes to talk more about the kind of stuff that you guys want to know about. Visit us at storydeepdive.com, and we will be back next week to discuss the characters of this story, which is one of the strongest, like one of the really strongest parts of this story is the cast. It's a beautifully written and created cast. So look forward to that. We got lots of good stuff coming your way. So until then, we will see you next week, and happy writing.